Good morning, and if you're on the east side of the country, good afternoon. This is Rick Cleveland, Director of Education and Accreditation for the Supply Chain Management Association. It's my pleasure to welcome you all to today's webinar, Advance Your Career in the Supply Chain. The webinar will run for approximately a half hour. I will stick around for Q&A afterwards. I'll try to get done in less time than that, but we'll see how things go. Today we are going to talk about SCMA, take a look at the supply chain sector, our current predictions and problems. Then we're going to talk about what we really mean when we say supply chain management. And once we have that understanding, we'll revisit the supply chain sector before we talk about SCMA's education programs, the supply management training program and the supply chain management professional designation. And then we'll close off with talking about some of the advantages of being associated with SCMA. We're a well-established, brand new association. The Purchasing Management Association of Canada and the Supply Chain and Logistics Association of Canada merged on September 3rd of this year, combining the best in supply chain education with the best in professional networking and industry events. We're the premier end-to-end association for Canadian supply chain professionals with more than 7,500 members across Canada. We're stewards of the SCMP designation, Supply Chain Management Professional, which is the highest level of achievement in the field. But we don't stop there. We offer continuous professional development opportunities to our members and designation holders with conferences, symposiums, webinars, and we have an unparalleled learning and networking experience for supply chain management professionals. Our mission is to build leadership in supply chain management. Our vision is to ensure employers recognize the value and contribution of supply chain management professionals to the success of their organizations. I'd like you to notice that our vision doesn't actually say anything about SCMA because it's not about us. It's about the field. It's about the profession that we choose. Our values are to be professional, collaborative, and focused. Canada's supply chain. This information was published by the Canadian Supply Chain Sector Council. It should be noted that this figure of 813,000 employees does not include truck drivers. They're a distinct sector on their own. But these are the 7 sectors that we generally refer to when we speak about supply chain in our world. The sales and marketing roles, by the way, that we have at the bottom there are primarily related to 3PL, which is a continuously growing area in the supply chain market. And those who have an honest background in supply chain, tactical, operational, and strategic thinking are able to move into these roles, and we do include them when we speak about the supply chain employment and subsectors. Talk about some of the predictions. In 2012, the Canadian Supply Chain Sector Council stated that there's an awful lot of new and vacant positions becoming available. Largely this is due to attrition with people retiring, but it's also somewhat due to changes in business strategy. Specifically, please note that supply chain employees increasing at a rate of 8.4% for tactical occupations, but almost 15% for managerial occupations. What this tells us is that the new positions that are being created at a higher job skill level percentage-wise than those at the entry level. This brings us to the availability challenge with all these people looking at changing through attrition and through creation of new job opportunities. Adrian Harrison, who's one of our contributors to the Experts Corner that we have within the Supply Chain Management Association voice column, had stated last year that these were some of the things that we were seeing in the supply chain environment. Because of the change from tactical to strategic skill requirements, employers are trying hard to find candidates with the right skills. Designations are becoming more and more in demand because it's a testament that the person has demonstrated the necessary skills in an appropriate evaluative environment. In the 2011 employer survey, there was a baseline survey in 2005 across North America that was done by Supply Chain Insights in the U.S., and they suggested that supply chain graduates at that time were lacking in basic technical skills. We have since closed the gap on that, and by we I mean all of the learning institutions, not just professional associations, but schools, post-secondary schools as well. In a follow-up survey that was conducted in 2011, employees identified primarily that what they were looking for and not finding in their recent graduates are those with abilities to make critical decisions, to manage client expectations, and to provide the level of customer service that's being required. In addition, there were some concerns around basic literacy and numeracy skills, but those, I believe, were more in the U.S. than in the Canadian environment. But regardless, the perception that came out from this has led to a preference of poaching over development. So in other words, most companies that are hiring to fill these positions are looking to find people who have experience in another company that competes with them, and they're looking to move forward from that point. What that does is creates a domino effect as people then move from one company to another. And the problem is those who have recently graduated and are trying to find new work are not being easily moved into these roles as companies continue to look for people with experience from their competition. So we have a disconnect. We have the employer perception that we just covered in the last slide, and then we have students and educators who are claiming that these skills are being taught and they're being taught well. So we need to identify what is the problem. I personally believe that the disconnect is caused by employees who adapt to the new environment to fit in. They're graduating with large loans that they have to pay back their education. They need to pass a probation period, and they're not being provided with a mentor at work when they start there. So they're not given the comfort that it's okay to shake things up with new ideas. So instead what they're doing is adapting to the existing environment in which they're found. So they adapt to the do what we do, not what you were trained to do when you were in college. So as a result, the employers are not seeing the application of the knowledge and skills that they have when they're entering the supply chain. So because of this lack of confidence in the new labor pool, employers are still choosing to poach employees from their competitors. Many companies fail to provide employees with a reason to stay, and so they're more willing to be poached. And again, this brings us back to the domino effect I referred to. Nobody who values the contribution of the supply chain talent wants to bring in the new graduates when they're, and have them set up with a conscious choice to be educated in supply chain skills. We have to have companies that are willing to take things to that next level and make sure that they're willing to invest in their employees as they develop them to be sure that they can see the skill set that they're looking for. It takes time for schools to change their programs because of the governance structure that they have. It's also hard to find somebody who really understands supply chain and can teach it well. It's easy to find educators that are that have the educational development skills. They get their teaching credentials. They may or may not understand supply chain to the degree that they need to have in order to teach it properly. Alternatively, a lot of supply chain practitioners have moved into the education field. Some of them have learned how to teach well, and others are not quite there yet, which means imparting their knowledge upon the students is not taking place at the level at which it needs to. At SCMA, we do have, as most schools do, an instructor evaluation tool that allows students to comment on the capabilities of the instructor as well as on the course material. And we have an instructor mentoring program and a support committee to assist us with better ways to explain the concepts, to ensure that students are grasping what we're trying to implore upon them, and have constant development of our evaluation tools. So the real problem is what the companies are not investing the time in their employees to ensure that not only do they have the skills, but they have the authority and the confidence to apply them at work. Succession planning is not taking place at the level it needs to. We only have about 1/3 of employers in the Canadian marketplace that are that have a succession plan in place in the supply chain realm, and this is clearly something that we need to make a stronger effort to develop. So who's working on fixing the problem? Well, we have the question, should HR be promoting training programs for supply chain to fix the problem? Can educators provide what is needed? If we accept that the answer is yes to both of those questions, then we have to ask, is that enough to be successful? When you look at purchasing an ERP system for a company, we need to identify the requirements before we decide what we're going to implement as far as any system goes. So we need to do the same thing when we're looking at hiring people into these higher level supply chain jobs. Who has the right education programs for our needs? Where should we look to find the people that we need to find? And for the ones that we have already, to which educational opportunities should we send them so that they can learn what they need to learn? So first we need to understand what is our company strategy and decide if it's in line with what the educators are offering. So before we talk about any more about education and how it's addressing the supply chain employment problem, let's talk about what we actually mean when we refer to supply chain. Supply chain management is not a functional silo within the business. It's a cash-to-cash strategic planning, tactical, operation, and process management, monitor, and control system. It's bigger than any one company. It's bigger than the minimum 3 entities you have to have a supply chain, which would be a supplier, some value-added operation, and the customer. While the operational pillars are procurement, logistics, and operation, it's bigger than that as well. Supply chain planning is driven by marketing and the strategies that are put in place by the corporate ideology, the mission and vision statements. It's enabled by knowledge management, which would be the information transfer, and by human resources, which helps to identify what requirements the company has and how best to address those. The direct output of supply chain management within an organization is improved cost accounting, better customer service, and revenue growth. It doesn't just end with cutting costs. It's all about how do you develop a stronger business as well. Those who fail to understand that are doomed to the false impression of success, which is what we'll talk about next. What it boils down to, fundamentally speaking, we need to understand, why do customers give us money instead of giving it to our competitors? So on the right-hand side, we've got our dollar sign. And really in supply chain, that's the only question you have to have. Why is it that the money flows into us? Because if we can understand that, then we can determine what information we need, that's our little eye on the left-hand side, and how it needs to flow so that we can ensure that we continue to get that money into our pockets as opposed to our competitors. Marketing is going to help us figure out what goods or services we need to provide, and then we have to find a way to get it there, and it needs to be faster and cheaper, more effective and more efficient than what our competitors are able to do. We have to understand, as we're looking at this, that one size does not fit all. So I know, not from experience, thank you, because I was smart enough not to do this, that if I were to take my wife for an anniversary dinner, it would be to a nice place with a nice meal with quiet ambiance. It would not be to a fast food restaurant where we would head in and I could save myself a great deal of money. However, having said that, if we look at the supply chains for these two, or not even supply chains, but just the internal customer service requirement for these two scenarios, a cashier working in a fast food wants to be quick and accurate, and that provides just as much value to our customer experience as having a waiter who is precise and considerate in our first restaurant scenario. So I reiterate, you need to know why the consumer gives you the money instead of the competitor. There's nothing wrong with being a fast food restaurant. It doesn't mean that their supply system and their methodology is not as good as a sit-down restaurant. And likewise, there's nothing wrong with being a sit-down restaurant that's going to have much higher costs as long as you're providing what the customer requires. So once more, understand what it is that drives the money into our supply chain. And not just for us as the restaurant, but as a supplier of the restaurant now, and as those who supply the suppliers right down to the farms. So our supply chain benefits, once we have all this aligned and once we understand it, we recognize supply chain is about the efficient use of resources to drive value and to capture the consumer dollar. Now that we get this, we understand about reducing costs, minimizing inventory, enhancing flexibility, improving time to market, analyzing and delivering on total value, not just the cost into our system, but the actual value to the consumer, evaluating the product and service life cycles, and optimizing our supplier relationships to make sure that we have suppliers who are working with us to also understand the value to the consumer at the end. Now we can take a look at the sector as well. One of the things that happened in the sector is we now have generational differences. We always have, but they're changing a little more rapidly now. So yesterday's leaders created the associations that we turn to today. they didn't have the education opportunity, so they had to address a way to develop it themselves. And we're very grateful to them because we wouldn't be here without them. Today we have the education opportunities. There are several schools across Canada at the post-secondary level that are offering supply chain education, but they still aren't providing the full measure of what employers need. Another important opportunity that too many companies overlook is hiring intern or co-op students to work on projects under the supervision of department employees who are not managers but one day could be. It's a great opportunity for companies to address all of the issues we've talked about so far by looking to the post-secondary schools and identifying those in their area that have co-op opportunities or internships and bringing these people in, not to work as people who can be file clerks for you, but to work on the projects that they're trained in school to work on and to do things that the people within your company haven't got time or the budget freed up in order to do them. So these students can come in, work with you, usually on a 4-month project, and then they can either run the entire project in that time or just carry out aspects of it for a larger project. You can have them under the supervision of someone that you want to develop into a leadership role within the company. And this is one of the best approaches that we find to marrying what we have with the education teachings that are out there, the application of the skills that the students are acquiring, and meeting the company's needs. And there's not nearly enough companies that are looking at the intern and co-op opportunities. So to help develop their ability, you can have those people you're looking at for leadership roles oversee the co-op student and report into their management team with how the project's going. It's a great opportunity for management development. It gets extra help to move supply chain projects forward. And if you contact your local schools, I'm sure you'll find that there are several programs of this type. It's usually a 4-month commitment, but the benefit that you get from this can last 10 years or more. In fact, I know of some students in the Ontario region who have gone through as a co-op student and ended up being hired on as a full-time employee and have moved into management positions. We've now got about 20 years of teaching supply chain concepts in professional associations and 10 or more years in some of the major schools. So it's time for us as the employment area to start capitalizing on this. Some supply chain insights. Now, Supply Chain Insights is actually a U.S.-based resource company run by Laura Sassier. She's the president and CEO. She's been for a long time associated with Supply Chain Brain, which is another great resource. And she conducts surveys for meaningful analysis among supply chain practitioners. And she gave me permission to use her data so long as I recognize her as the source, which I have now done. So in one of her more recent studies, we found that companies have thought that they had made a great stride in driving results that are coming out of this. However, when looking at the actual financial balance sheets and income statements, the revenue per employee has improved, which is showing that we're getting better efficiency out of our supply chain people and out of our teams in general. But it's only the high-tech and electronics industries that showed real progress on cost changes in supply chain, cost changes beyond a supply chain department to the actual supply chain costs of a company, and the inventory management aspects. So for most companies, the growth is stalled, the costs are rising, inventory levels are actually increasing, and complexity reigns. Now, some of this has to do with outsourcing, some of it has to do with increased security requirements at borders, and most companies, especially in Canada, are involved in importing goods or moving goods across the border in some way, shape, or form. So companies have invested in systems, people, and processes, but they're still not getting the progress, and the question is why. We do have the concern that there are boardrooms that react to individual metrics without understanding the impact on the supply chain as a holistic system. So we have an issue with customer service levels. We'll focus on the supply chain as a project related to customer service and what can we do to better satisfy our customers. And once those levels start to improve, we then say, well, now our transportation costs are high. What can we do to move those down? And we look at that as a supply chain project. But again, we're not looking holistically at delivering value to the consumer and working with our suppliers to minimize the cost of the overall supply chain as opposed to cost pockets within the company or within one company within the supply chain. So most companies adopt supply chain projects. They don't look at a systematic way of collaboratively doing business and eliminating costs from the overall supply chain, which is what needs to be done to get that greater share of the consumer dollar. Our root cause, the key here is that since most people consider supply chain really to be about warehouses and trucks, they don't understand how they can have multiple supply chains in one business. Companies like Walmart, Loblaws, they get it. They have a furniture supply chain, a perishable food supply chain, a cold chain supply chain, a pharmaceutical supply chain, clothing supply chain, and on it goes. You've got points of convergence where everything comes together and you can do things within one warehousing or transportation network. But you also have points of divergence where those supply chains that have come together for a short period of time can actually have increased efficiencies if they're separated. They can actually have better cross-control or better customer service, and there might even be regulatory requirements for why you have to do that. So in fixing the problem, we need to take a look at supply chain excellence. It's not just benchmarking against your competitors, it's going back to marketing, finance, customer service strategies, and aligning them all with the business. It's about end-to-end process leaders that don't just push the costs up or down the chain onto our partners, but actually remove those costs from the chain completely. And it's not about finding the low-hanging fruit. It's about shaking the whole tree from the tallest branches right down to the roots and finding out what your company requires of your supply chain and then making sure that you bring in the right skills to meet that need. Offshoring was set up to save some money here and there, but some companies didn't look at what is the total cost to inventory investment and transportation, and more importantly, to risk management. One of the keys that most people overlook is the SCMA. We have a tendency to have an increase in the cost when the back office processes are put in place. The cost of selling and administering with our customers ends up going up as a result. So we need to ensure that we're managing holistically within the whole value chain and not just looking at one aspect of satisfying customer needs or dealing with our suppliers. So strategies are needed to drive projects, but when it comes to supply chain, it needs to go beyond projects and it needs to become a continuous improvement mindset. And again, it has to be continuous improvement of finding why does the consumer give the money into our supply chain? What can we do to work with our suppliers to move information to get the goods and services where they need to be to address that? So going back and looking at the sector from the employer's perspective, the sector needs more leadership and soft skill training. We have a growing employee deficit, and we plan to address this by poaching other employees and hoping that the good ones that are in our company don't get poached. Unfortunately, hope is not a strategy. We need to put something into place that helps us better identify what we can do. So we need to find a way to close the employment gap. And one way is to improve training and learning opportunities through job rotation in the hiring process. When new employees are brought on board, they should be advised that, in 6 months, we're probably going to move you into a different position. It may be a lateral move as opposed to an upward move, but there's nothing wrong with making lateral moves, and I believe that the employees coming out of the schools today understand this. Most companies, when they put people in through these lateral development roles, it is to help develop big picture thinking for advancement into senior positions. And if we have companies that are not doing this, that are focused on, well, this person has this skill set, so they have to stay within this department and wait for an opening, we're selling ourselves short, and we're selling short the opportunity to really tackle true supply chain issues. Not everyone needs to be encouraged because there are some times where we just want to have people that stay in the same position for a long time. But we need to be selective in identifying which skill sets are required to move people into senior positions. When are we going to identify that we have issues in senior positions and need to backfill them, and put in a plan at least 2 to 3 years before that time, before somebody gets close to retirement age, before they get poached by other companies, that we can set up a back plan so that we can backfill them as we get to that point. Looking at some specific trends, if we look at certain sectors and see exactly what skills are in demand, and again, I thank Adrian Harrison for lending us an expert's view through the column that he wrote in Expert's Corner for us a year ago. The public sector has a lot of opportunity as they focus more on the profession and specific skills needed for the job. They are taking a look at moving beyond tactical into professional development within their realm. There's an increased demand as more companies are focused on supply chain efficiencies. A lot of companies have already moved into an ERP environment, which at the time created a shortage of candidates in the pool that had that skill set. But I'd actually expect that trend to start reversing soon. More and more companies have already moved into the ERP, and now those people are available to move their skill sets into other areas and into other strategic thinking opportunities. So companies need to determine whether they should protect those employees from being poached or allow them to move out the door and open up new opportunities within supply chain. In retail, companies like Canadian Tire buying the Fresani Group are going to result in supply chain positions being eliminated, but as we discussed, it's also going to mean that there's more strategic approach at a higher level and more challenging jobs being created once those redundancies are eliminated. Zeller's moved out and Target moved in, and we have a requirement of jobs, some that have stayed the same, but there's also a large requirement for some that have changed. The skill set for engaging a new culture in the same building with many of the same people in the same basic industry is a very difficult and challenging task. It's going to be interesting to see how this unfolds, and I personally expect to see a lot of change over the next couple of years at Target as supply chain opportunities and growth within their supply chain realm changes. Obviously, Sears is facing an interesting time in their history right now. They're going to need to find the right supply chain talent if they don't have it, as they continue through announcements such as the ones they've made about closing down some of their larger retail locations. And of course, on the manufacturing side, Heinz is just the latest one to announce closure of a facility in Canada. We're seeing a lot of this. Manufacturing jobs had actually climbed back to a respectable pre-recession numbers, but there doesn't appear to be a continuing positive trend. In fact, U.S. companies tend to move production and jobs outside of Canada, and we do have a lot of Canadian companies that are satellites of U.S. However, this does create a lot of opportunities for proper inventory management and transportation. We're not talking about the low-level tactical jobs where people just have to be able to get stuff across the border because the U.S. facility is moving manufacturing back home. We're talking about actually understanding the inventory management and transportation needs of the Canadian marketplace and how to do that when you're dealing with cross-border imports. And then, of course, 3PL and distribution, a continuously growing sector. As outsourcing continues to occur, those who have lean training and continuous improvement and Six Sigma skills are going to be in high demand in that sector. So those are some of the specific trends that we're seeing in needs and requirements of supply chain skills and attributes across Canada. At SCMA, we take a look back at our values. We are collaborative, and so we're working with schools to ensure that the best training is available out there for people. We want to make sure that we have the opportunities for those developing in their supply chain career, that they can develop those skill sets further. And as we focus on career development, we need to understand that there are different needs as we move through our career. Employers have different expectations of our skills, our knowledge, and our aptitudes. We recognize this, and so we've developed programs to ensure success for our members as they move from one area to another. As you develop your career, you need to move from being a provider of advice and information to becoming a strategic decision-maker, relying on others to provide business advice and information, and using your discernment skills. And then, of course, we want to go from knowing things to doing things to leading others to do the right things in the right way. And so it is an ongoing, continuous commitment to education that goes beyond having graduated from school to developing your career with professional associations such as SCMA. So our education programs, we realize again that one size does not fit all, so we provide two separate streams for professional training, and we have different methods of delivering it. We'll also bring the training directly to companies that need it, so if you want to get in touch with your local SCMA institute, they can set things up so that we can bring training programs on site to help ensure that we're meeting the specific needs and requirements of what your company has for their supply chain education teams. Our supply management training certificate program, this is for early career development. We offer technical training in functional areas of supply chain management. One of the advantages of our SMT program is that those candidates who wish to later pursue their professional designation actually get credit from the soft skills workshops, as long as they've taken this within 5 years of moving into the next level. and then they can begin in the designation program and not have to repeat everything that they've already been through. Our SMT training consists of 4 technical courses: procurement, logistics, transportation, and operations, as well as 3 interactive workshops focused on communication and relational, on negotiations, and on competitive bidding and contract, and then on business management skills that are required as well: accounting and finance, marketing, and business planning. Our SCMP designation program is aimed at developing strategic leaders. The requirements to enroll in this program include both education and work experience. It is a more elitist program. Ours is the first designation program in North America to achieve the International Federation of Purchasing and Supply Management's global standard. It is well respected internationally. Both the Institute of Supply Management in the U.S. and the Chartered Institute of Purchasing and Supply in the U.K. recognize the SCMP designation for reciprocity with their own designations. The 2 key differences of professional designation versus academic credentials are consistency of skills training. While colleges and universities offer business degrees with various optional electives, depending on what school you went to and which electives you took will depend on what particular knowledge, skills, and aptitudes you have coming out. But they all end up with what is commonly just referred to as a degree with the same designation to it, at the same connotation within the degree. With our professional designation, we know the content required by employers as we go out and continuously meet with them to understand what their needs are. We have a process in place to update our course material to meet the emerging needs of these employers. And having said that, we do have one variance in our program, which is for public sector. Of the 16 components required for the SCMP designation, we do have one that I'll call an elective that allows you to specialize in the public service area. The other key difference is that once it's earned, your educational credential is yours to keep forever, but the professional designation has to be recertified annually. So we have a point system that validates the degree of activity that you maintain within the professional community once you have achieved your designation. So for our SCMP designation program, we have 8 tactical modules, 6 interactive workshops, a 1-week intensive in-residence program to prepare for your life as a network professional, and then a 2-day final exam that evaluates the learning outcomes and makes sure that they're able to apply strategic thinking from the years of training that have led up to the exam. And you did hear correctly, that is a 2-day final exam. And then, of course, afterwards, the learning doesn't end. Designates are required to maintain the relevance with continuous professional development requirements. So our functional competencies for this program are focused on supply chain management, procurement and supply management, logistics and transportation, and operations and process management from a strategic initiative. As well, knowledge management, understanding the information flow, global sourcing, supply chain management for the public sector, which everyone goes through even if they're not in that particular stream, supply chain management for services, capital goods, and major projects, and then competitive bidding, contract preparation, and contract management. Then we focus on management competencies of leadership and professionalism, negotiation skills, communication and relation skills, international business and multicultural skills, and ethical and social responsibility skills. For the employer, the advantages of having put your people through the SCMA is you've got access to industry-driven training programs that are designed to meet business needs, development of highly skilled ethical leaders who have job satisfaction and are less likely to be poached by other companies. What we find is that those who have earned their designation tend to stay with the company they're with somewhat longer than those who do not have designations. For employees, there's an advantage to having access to cutting-edge research, international best practice, continuous skills development, which makes you more valuable to your employers, exceptional networking learning opportunities, providing more value to your employers, resulting in salary premiums and advancement. That takes us through the presentation. I did actually go 5 minutes over the time that was allotted, so I do apologize to those who tuned in expecting it to be a half-hour webinar. I am available for question and answer. If you'd like to type your question into the little box at the bottom of your screen, I'd be happy to take any questions at this point. And of course, using the contact information on the screen here, you can contact us at any time for any follow-up going forward. I don't see any questions at this point. Hopefully that's an indication that you are satisfied with the information I provided and not an indication that I put you all to sleep and no one is aware of what's going on right now. All right, in this case, I thank you all for your time. We will make this presentation available to members through our webinar. If you do have any questions, as I said, you can contact through info@scmanational.ca. You can also contact me directly. It's rcleveland, R as in Rick, Cleveland spelled just like the city, at scmanational.ca, and I'd be very happy to follow up with anyone on any supply chain topics because that's what I live for. Thanks very much. Have a great day.